And with that, I am so pleased to introduce Melissa Deas, our first case study presenter. Melissa serves as the Chief Resilience Officer for Washington, D.C. in the district's Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. She leads efforts to ensure the district can thrive in a changing world by pushing forward policies that address shocks and chronic stresses. Melissa comes to HSEMA from the district's Department of Energy and Environment, where she oversaw the implementation of the district's climate preparedness plan, Climate Ready DC. Before working for the district, Melissa served as a resilience expert for the California Energy Commission, Georgetown Climate Center, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. And she received her BA in sociology from Harvard University and a master's in city planning from MIT. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks, everyone. Let me pull up my slides. And while I am doing that, I will just say that I am so thrilled to be here. I have been in my role as the Chief Resilience Officer for the district for about a year and a half now. I think it was a really interesting and great change to move from where sort of traditionally adaptation has been sitting in an environmental agency over to emergency management. A lot of what my job now is to connect federal resources and dollars to projects, which is great because that was often the limiting factor in my prior role of getting things done, was that we could never figure out quite how to pay for things. And so we have been really successful in the district at doing that and have some really big, exciting projects coming down the road. And I am not going to be talking about any of those today. So just a couple of those before I jump into that is that we, through FEMA BRIC funding, we're doing a blue-green infrastructure project in the southwest part of the district, where we're really thinking how we can kind of take some of the Dutch models of thinking about retaining and detaining stormwater and cloudburst analysis in one of our communities that has a lot of affordable housing developments, a lot of senior housing, and really apply it and create some community amenities there. So that's a big project that was recently funded. We also have a project to develop power resiliency in a microgrid at a new hospital in Ward 8 of the district, which, if you know things about the district, is one of the wards with the highest levels of poverty and lowest life expectations. So a really important project. We just got funded a project to support resiliency of our wastewater treatment plant in a really great way. So lots of things happening. But today I'm going to be talking all about communication and sort of just work that we are doing to refresh a website. And I know that feels like small potatoes, but I actually think it's some of the most important work that we're doing right now. So really excited to share it. So I think one of the principles that I wanted to start with was this ensuring fairness in decision making. I think this is something that we haven't been achieving for our current website, where, you know, the website was, we spent a lot of money on it a few years back, but it was really just an in-house project. We didn't go out and make sure that we were thinking about the audience by involving them in the process. And because of that, the website currently falls flat in a few different ways. So this is Ready DC website. It's our site on how to prepare for different threats and hazards. And while it's not specifically a website about climate adaptation or climate change, all of these have a climate adaptation element to them. And so it could be a place where we're having those conversations about climate adaptation. And we're still kind of working on that. So you're not going to see a ton in this particular presentation on that, but it is definitely something that we're thinking about it. And I'll hint at some of those areas as we get through. But the current website, while it looks nice, it's divided in a way that's simply not intuitive at all for users. So we have a section called Be Aware, which has a drop-down list, which has a bunch of different hazards that people can explore. And then we also have a section that's called Be Prepared, which has preparedness tips by audience. that distinction turns out to be not intuitive at all. People don't think of, where am I going to find a page about extreme heat under Be Aware? Where am I going to find some information about how I protect my pets under Be Prepared? It's also really passive. We're expecting that people are interested enough in all of these issues that they're coming to our website, which is just false. And then the other thing is that it's unclear how this website plays with other resources that the district has. So here is our page on extreme heat. You'll notice here that it has pretty good information on it. We're working on refreshing that information, making it a little bit better. But when we're actually having a heat emergency in the district, which is basically every day in the summer, we direct people to heat.dc.gov, which is a completely different page with completely different information, and isn't connected at all. And so there's this weird redundancy, and we're not working together even within this. This is an HCMO webpage within the same agency that is running the same site. So I think one of the things that I am thinking about is, when we write a plan or do a big infrastructure project, community engagement is an assumption. It's something that we just integrate directly from the beginning as something that we're going to do. But arguably, residents are accessing our web content, seeing our advertisements on buses and other places way more than they're going to open up and read a plan. So should these things not go through community engagement too, right? Like the private sector would never think about spending $1 million on a Super Bowl ad without testing it. We also shouldn't spend a lot of money putting up advertisements or putting up a website without doing some user analytics on it. But this is a really big shift for how government thinks about things. They kind of think of these as like low-level things that don't deserve this kind of attention. And so we're trying to rethink that. And I would say arguably, right, like we are doing these big multi-million-dollar projects, but if we can get 1,000 people in the district to have an emergency kit in their home and to know what their hazards are and how to protect their neighbors, we're doing more than I think that $20 million infrastructure project will do. So we went into this project with this research question, understanding the perceptions, needs, and awareness and behaviors of DC residents around, and we used 3 specific hazards as where we wanted to start: winter weather, extreme heat, and flooding. Extreme heat and flooding have huge climate change implications. Winter weather, I think, has implications that people don't think about in terms of, while our winters may be coming shorter, they're likely to become more severe. So how do we really prioritize these different threats? We came up with a methodology where we would go and do community research first, then develop prototypes and concepts, do a second round of community feedback, and then that would go into our final concepts. So round 1 was that community research. We asked, where are residents now? What are their current levels of attitudes, concerns about natural hazards? What are they thinking about? What are they already doing? And if they're not doing things to be prepared, what stands in the way of action? And how are we getting residents information? And we recruited 14 participants for in-depth interviews, and specifically we're thinking about recruiting people based off of the disproportionate impacts we know we're going to be seeing in the district. So we wanted to make sure to have people from our wards that have the highest percentage of Black residents, have the lowest incomes. We wanted to make sure that we were bringing in people who didn't speak English as a first language. We know that a lot of these natural hazards impact people who are older more. Wanted to think about transient residents, wanted to think about pre-existing health conditions. So we wanted to really be very, very specific about who we were talking to and focus on having really good in-depth conversations with a smaller group of people rather than doing some sort of broad survey. And so this really goes to the principle about safeguarding people. We want to make sure that we know that climate change and that these hazards do not have the same impacts on all people. Some people are simply going to be more sensitive. So let's lead with those folks and make sure that we're reaching them. So some insights that we learned from this engagement is, one, that DC residents are really guessing when it comes to assessing their own risk. And by and large, they're score or underplaying their own risk, right? So they think, oh, extreme weather doesn't happen here. The district is moderate, or I don't live in a basement apartment, so I'm not at risk. And people really don't fully understand that their risk is changing, and that they can't just use their past experience living in the district. And that's even out of step with the actual number of events that we have in the district. People just simply aren't aware of what those are. They're also not aware of the tools that we already have to have them assess their own risks or to deal with those risks. Most people don't know that we have cooling centers when it's hot out. Most people don't know that we have a tool where you can see what your risk of flooding is. And that makes sense because people are busy. There's a lot of noise. They are thinking about all of the things that come up every day that are more pressing and more right in front of their face. And it becomes hard to figure out how to have preparedness messaging break through all of that. And so we have to figure out how to connect preparedness messaging into the things that people are already concerned about, and how to deliver information in a way where they don't have to work to get it. And so this is part of that principle around recognizing context, that we really have to understand the context in which people are operating. And instead of asking people to come to our context, go to them, and work in that construct where we know people are busy. We learned that people without a catalyst to act aren't doing things to be prepared. And unfortunately, the catalyst to act most often is some sort of human suffering. They see a neighbor, they see somebody, they themselves are impacted in one way or another, and that all of a sudden becomes what makes them act. And so our question is, how do we get to people before they have that level of suffering? How do we offer some sort of carrot so that people are acting when it's not in a disaster situation? We also learned that there are a ton of people who are excited about helping their neighbors, about being part of this community, but they just are one step away from being able to actualize that role. They don't know what resources exist. And like a lot of other cities, we have community ambassadors for this kind of work, but it takes a 3-day, 4-day training and a lot of time commitment. And there's sort of a middle ground of people that if you just give them a couple tools and resources, they may be ambassadors for this work in more informal ways. And we've got to leverage those people. And despite people wanting to be prepared, as I mentioned before, they really want information to come to them. These are all of the ways that people are getting information. Only one of these is active, and it's not the most common way. And so we have to figure out how to use these existing channels to reach people. DC has a notification system. We learned that almost everybody turns off or silences their notifications after they sign up because they're getting too many notifications. And so it just becomes something that isn't worth paying attention to. And if we are giving them notifications, it's not useful for them. They're not getting linked into better information if they want to explore more, or really being told what to do with that information. And we also learned that the most common time when somebody is going to seek out information is during an event. So we have to use those as hooks to get to people. And so we did some research into what are the things that people during an event are going to ask to, and then maybe we can get somebody that is trying to figure out if it's safe to drive, trying to figure out if they should keep their business open or closed during a snowstorm. You get somebody to go to the website for that reason, and then you find ways to feed them other information. And so this is really important when we're thinking about each of these hazards. It's going to be a little bit different what questions people have per hazard. And that is the entry point where you can start having that conversation about future risk and right-sizing it. During that flood event, you get somebody that's interested in just figuring out which roads are open, and you present other information. During a snow event, similarly, you get somebody who's trying to figure out where they're allowed to park their car, if it's safe to have their team in to open their business, and you get them to the other information. During a heat event, it's what are the low-cost options to keep your house cool? What are the health and safety concerns? And you get to them through that. So in terms of the opportunities, it's really about linking in and coming from these places where we're hearing what residents want and not fighting it, and figuring out how our messaging fits in with it. And then also figuring out how we get other people to amplify the message. So once, like I mentioned before, once we did that first round of research, we developed prototypes and then collected feedback on it. Here are some examples of messages that we tested. From this, we really learned that the emergency kit one and the heat one resonated the most. People looking to save money, that was something that came up in interviews as important to them, but in a flyer, it was just a little bit too abstract. And the map, it's hard for a flyer for it to be detailed enough to be useful. We also learned that it's all about figuring out the right level of detail that you're giving people. So while we want people to go to the website and use the QR code, that's asking too much of them. It's an extra step. They just need to be given the important information right in front of them without having to do any work, and then maybe they'll get to the website. Our current flyer, which is the one in the middle, people really like, but it's too detailed. It's not quite right for a flyer. And then that one on the end is sort of your Goldilocks option of just the right amount of information. And then we also tested a bunch of elements for the website, and are working on building some of these out. We may not be able to do all of them at once. You'll see visualizing future risk is in there and is something that we're eventually hoping to do, but haven't yet been integrated into these prototypes for what the website could look like. But this is what we're thinking about as a new homepage, where it's the general information for all emergencies right in front of you when you go to the website. And then a tool that people can use to assess their own risk and really understand that, where they can put in some basic demographic information, get tailored information specific to where they live, to that demographic information. This is where we may do some of the future risk stuff. Is we also hope this map right now doesn't show any geographic information, but eventually we'll put in our urban heat island map here some of the heat sensitivity mapping that we've done, and then figure out a way to talk about how that's changing in the future. And then we'll have profile pages on the actual risks. And this is another place where we plan to have some of that future conversation in there, but leading first with the things that people really care about, like health and safety when it comes to heat, and then eventually getting into what resources are available and some more information. So just some next steps on this is that this website is all right, still in prototype. We've gotten some really good feedback on what resonated and redone some aspects of it, but we still have to build out the website. So there's a lot of devil in the details with this kind of thing. I know that this group is interested in adaptation. That's still a question that we're grappling with, is exactly how we communicate some of those messages. But I think one of the things that we've been talking about a lot about is that, right, there's marketing that I said that we need to do in addition to the website. We can't just assume people are going to come to the website. And that's through written materials, but it's more importantly through ongoing outreach. And so while this is a website, it's not just a website, it's just one communication tool. And ultimately it's going to be the presentations that we do through schools, going to community fairs, going to community meetings and talking about all of this, and having people be able to then access our resources afterwards, which is more important. So here's my contact information. Happy to talk more about any of this. Also, we'll plug that we have an internship every fall, spring, and summer at HCMA. So if you know students, especially in this area, we're always looking to bring on good people and have the next generation integrated into our work. So thank you.